Her daughter-in-law tossed a trash bag into her lap, said the closet wasn't a museum. Rosemary didn't argue. She just kept the bag. 3 weeks later, Paige returned to find every room stripped, every account inaccessible, and her own name removed from the emergency contact forms. The house? Sold. The contents? Archived. The trust? Untouchable and airtight. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The slap of plastic against cloth was louder than it should have been. A black garbage bag landed squarely in Rosemary Heller's lap, its weight heavy and unbalanced, like something thrown away in a hurry. Paige didn't sit down. She stood there in her neon-cropped hoodie and white sneakers, tapping her phone screen as if she hadn't just dumped a lifetime onto her grandmother's legs. "These are your memories," she said flatly. "Hope you don't mind. We cleaned up a little." Rosemary didn't answer. She looked down at the bulging bag, the drawstrings tied in a rushed knot. A strand of her late husband's Marine Corps ribbon poked out through a tear in the plastic like a wound-bleeding legacy. In the next room, Paige's voice chirped over a phone video. "Decluttering Grandma's life. Clean slate," she cooed. Alan chuckled behind the camera. "She's trying to help, Ma," he called out. Megan's voice, faint but sharp. "Honestly, we thought you'd thank us." Rosemary didn't move. Her back was ramrod straight in the armchair her husband built with his own hands 50 years ago, the one she refused to let them haul out for staging. She finally opened the bag. No sound, just the slow, surgical unfurling of plastic. A photo album with a cracked spine lay on top, edges curled from time and warmth. Below it, a dented jewelry box, a stack of letters with her sister's handwriting, a bronze dog tag marked W. Heller USMC, and near the bottom, her wedding veil. Crushed, but not ruined. She inhaled through her nose, drywall dust, rosewood polish, and the faint antiseptic tang of hand sanitizer. Paige must have used wipes. She closed the bag gently, pulled it tighter into her lap. Outside, a car door slammed. Deb Riley walked up the path like she'd done it 1,000 times before, her short gray bob bobbing in rhythm with her stride. She didn't knock. "I brought that lemon loaf you like. Oh, hell no!" Deb stopped dead in the doorway, eyes zeroing in on the bag. "Please tell me that's not what it looks like." Rosemary didn't speak. She just reached into the bag and, with reverence bordering on defiance, pulled out the veil. She shook it once, dust rising like breath, and smoothed it flat across her lap. "Jesus," Deb whispered, "they didn't even ask you." "No." Rosemary's voice was quiet but steady. "They didn't." She folded the veil with practiced care, aligning each edge the way she once had when she stored it after the wedding. Deb watched as Rosemary retrieved a linen-covered memory box from the cabinet beside her, the one with brass corners and her initials embossed faintly on the top. "They said it was just stuff," Rosemary murmured. Deb pressed her lips together, fists clenched at her sides. "Stuff doesn't have blood on it, or tears, or 50 years of being alive in it." Rosemary looked up. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't even wet. Just alert, awake. As if something inside her had clicked on after a long, dim sleep. "I don't think they realize what they just did," she said. She closed the box. In the hallway, Paige's laugh echoed from her phone screen again. Honestly, it smelled like mothballs and sadness, but whatever. That's clean slate. Rosemary reached into the side table drawer and took out a pen. Her hand didn't shake as she wrote something on a post-it note. She stuck it to the memory box, stood, and handed the bag to Deb. "I need you to hold on to this," she said. Deb looked down at the bag. "Why?" Rosemary's eyes didn't leave the hallway. "Because I'm going to show them what real trash looks like." The light in the study was softer than the rest of the house, filtered through a lace curtain that had yellowed around the edges. Outside, the sky was dimming to that pale lavender Iowa shade it took on before the cicadas started their slow hum. Rosemary sat at her husband's old oak desk, the one with dovetailed drawers and ink stains in the corners, and reached for the bottom cabinet with a quiet resolve. Her fingers wrapped around a thick manila envelope worn smooth from decades of filing and refiling. It slid out with the faintest rasp. She laid it flat, untied the faded butcher string, and opened the flap like someone uncovering the bones of something buried too long. Inside, the original copy of her will, her husband's signature still etched into the lower margin, bold, steady, unshaken. She unfolded the pages slowly, smoothing each corner with her palm as she went, letting the silence around her stretch and settle. Her eyes traced the familiar wording with slow precision until they landed on the section that made her stomach curl. Primary beneficiaries. Alan, listed first. Of course, he was her only son, even if he'd long since passed the point of understanding her. And then, just beneath him, Paige Alexandra Heller. The name looked like graffiti now, unwelcome, careless, spray-painted across a contract she once believed meant something sacred. Her jaw tightened as she pulled her phone closer and tapped out a message. Rosemary Heller text to Elijah Warren. "It's time. Bring the blank draft." She sent it without hesitation, then turned the will over and set it face down on the desk. She stared at the blank wooden grain for a moment, as if clearing it might also clear the weight pressing against her ribs. From the hallway, voices filtered through. Tinny, too loud, on speakerphone. "Staging's booked for Saturday," Paige said cheerfully. "Mid-century modern with some earthy touches. We'll just swap out the heavy stuff." "She means your furniture," Alan's voice added, with a chuckle that tried to be light and only sounded tired. Rosemary didn't answer. She didn't even blink. She picked up a navy blue moleskin notebook from the shelf above her desk, the kind she'd used for decades as an archivist, where each entry began with a date, a location, and the truth as it was witnessed. She uncapped a black gel pen and began to write. July 25, 2025 Documentation Log, Volume 1, Entry Number 001, Unapproved Staging scheduled by Paige Alexandra Heller, no ownership or authority granted, Alan Heller aware and passive, Megan Heller absent. She wrote slowly, deliberately, letting each word plant itself with clarity. The paper didn't tremble beneath her hand. She opened her laptop next, pausing only once as it flickered to life. On the screen was Paige's profile, still public, still proud. She scrolled to the video from earlier that afternoon. "Darned clean slate," it read. And beneath it, a caption. "Decluttering Grandma's hoard. No more mothball museum." She hit save, then took a screenshot, then another. Every digital post, every video, every smug little heart emoji from people who thought cruelty was cute. Each piece was labeled, archived, stored in a folder called Evidence, Family Probate. Behind her a door creaked. Deb Riley stepped in carrying 2 steaming mugs and paused at the sight of the screen. "Well, damn," Deb said. "You look like you're about to prosecute the whole family." Rosemary kept typing. "They wanted a clean slate. I'm giving them one, mine." Deb set down the tea, took in the array of folders, paper and digital, and leaned against the bookshelf. "You always kept records," she said after a moment. "Now you're weaponizing them." "I'm not weaponizing," Rosemary said softly. "I'm preserving. There's a difference." Deb let out a low breath and pulled out a chair across from her. "They still think you're that same woman in the armchair, the one who just sits there and lets it all happen. They're going to wish she was." Rosemary slid a printed copy of Paige's post into a fresh plastic sleeve and clicked it into a binder. The stack was already growing. Deb took a slow sip from her mug. "You want me to pick up more ink? Maybe a backup drive?" Rosemary didn't hesitate. "And a fireproof lockbox." Deb nodded and stood, catching the faint blue glow of Rosemary's phone lighting up again on the desk. "Elijah Warren, already drafting. Meet tomorrow. No digital trace." Rosemary stared at the message for a long moment before reaching across and tapping the screen to black. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, rustling dry leaves like the turning of pages never read. The attic stairs groaned beneath Rosemary's weight as she climbed them slowly, one hand gripping the banister, the other holding a flashlight even though the morning sun had begun to filter faintly through the side vents. The air up there was heavy with insulation dust and time, the kind of thickness that clung to your lungs and reminded you this space hadn't been meant for daily use. She stepped onto the plywood flooring and paused at the top, letting her eyes adjust to the dim. Everything was wrong. Her boxes, archived by decade, labeled in her neat block handwriting, had been torn open at the seams. Plastic bins were half-lidded, their contents slumped out like spilled guts. A framed newspaper clipping from 1968, the year she and Walter bought the house, was cracked across the center. Photo albums were stacked in uneven towers, some turned upside down. A ceramic vase her sister had given her after Walter returned from Vietnam had rolled into the corner, chipped on its rim like a broken tooth. She crouched beside a cardboard box marked Winter 1983, her fingers brushing across a pale yellow baby blanket that had once wrapped her son. It was balled up beneath a stack of junk mail from the kitchen table, crumpled. Coupons and a half-used notepad Paige must have dumped without looking. Rosemary stayed there for a long minute, staring into the open box. The smell was different now. Less cedarwood and old paper, more dry rot and carelessness. A hollowing had happened here. Footsteps thumped below, then the creak of the attic hatch lifting further. Paige's voice floated up like the tail end of a breeze already turned sour. "Figured we'd get ahead on the junk before the stagers come. You're not going to use any of this anyway." She didn't even bother to climb the stairs, just yelled it up like a landlord making an announcement. Rosemary didn't answer. She reached for her notepad and scribbled the date. July 26, 2025, entry number 002, unauthorized entry and disruption of preserved heirlooms. She pressed a yellow post-it to the baby blanket. To Haley. Another to the vase. To Deb. A third to the album. To local museum. Cedar Rapids Historical Collection. If they thought they were clearing things out, they hadn't counted on her reorganizing it right under their noses. A few hours later, Megan lingered in the kitchen while Deb unpacked groceries into the fridge. Her tone was casual, like someone commenting on weather that hadn't fully formed yet. "We've been thinking," Megan said. "If the place sits empty after, well, it might make sense to convert it into something useful. An Airbnb, maybe?" Paige knows a designer in Des Moines. Deb paused mid-reach. She looked at Megan, then turned and said nothing. Just closed the fridge door with deliberate care and walked out of the room. Elijah arrived just after 11, dressed in his Friday casual, khakis, blue button-down, and that leather satchel Rosemary had given him back when she finalized her first living trust. He set it down on the dining table, away from the piles of catalogs Paige had left scattered across the surface. "I've got the draft," he said. "All clean. No digital copy, just as requested." They sat together by the window, papers spread before them. His tone was even, but his eyes scanned her face with quiet scrutiny. Rosemary didn't flinch. She signed where he pointed, initialed every clause with unwavering strokes. When they reached the updated beneficiary section, Elijah hesitated. "You're sure you want to remove them entirely?" She didn't look up from the page. "I want it ironclad." "I can do that." "I want it irrevocable." There was no tremor in her voice, no rage either. Just certainty, the kind you find buried beneath the ash of long-burning resentment. Elijah nodded. "Then that's exactly what it will be." By the time Deb returned from the garage, Rosemary was already tucking the signed document into her fireproof safe. Paige's name no longer appeared anywhere in the primary designation. Alan's had been struck as well. "What now?" Deb asked quietly, not quite smiling. Rosemary turned the key in the safe, stood slowly, and dusted her hands. "Now," she said, "we let them stage an empty future." The receptionist at Pine Hollow Storage wore too much perfume, the kind that clung to paperwork long after it had been signed. Rosemary didn't mind. She'd already made her decision by the time she stepped out of Deb's car, the morning sky wide and cloudless above them. The facility was clean, unassuming, set behind a row of boxy medical offices and a self-serve car wash, the kind of place you only noticed when you needed to disappear something. The storage manager offered a laminated brochure and pointed them toward the climate-controlled units in Building C. Rosemary chose one in the back away from foot traffic, just large enough to walk through but compact enough to feel like a vault. She requested double locks, no shared access, and declined the free first-month promotion. Deb raised her eyebrows when they climbed back in the car. That was fast. I knew what size I needed before we left the house, Rosemary said. That afternoon, the sorting began. The house had become too unstable, too vulnerable to wandering hands and careless intentions. Up in the attic, Rosemary moved with quiet efficiency. Each item she packed felt like a memory being placed in safekeeping rather than storage. The quilt her grandmother stitched in 1932 went into a vacuum-sealed linen bag. Her late husband's campaign letters, 2 shoeboxes full of them, were stacked chronologically and wrapped in cotton ribbon. Deb handled the photos, sliding them one by one. It was sacred. Deb wiped her forehead with a dish towel. Feels more like a museum wing than a storage closet. That's the idea, Rosemary said, sealing the final bin. If they wanted me to be invisible, then I'll vanish somewhere they can't reach. She locked the first padlock, then the second. Outside, the sound of tires crunching gravel. A familiar voice, bright and sour all at once, sliced through the silence. Really, Grandma? A storage unit? Are you actually hoarding now? Paige stood near the open gate, arms folded across her oversized cardigan, sunglasses perched too high on her head. She looked at the unit like it offended her design sense. I mean, sure, she continued, if you're going to live in the past, you might as well box it up and put it in a cage. Deb took a step forward, but Rosemary gently touched her elbow. No words, just the soft insistence of restraint. Rosemary turned to her granddaughter, walked toward the unit door, and without speaking, pulled it closed with both hands. The steel groaned shut. Then came the decisive click of both padlocks snapping into place. She looked Paige directly in the eye and smiled, not sweetly, not kindly, just firmly, like someone who knew exactly what belonged behind that door and what didn't. Paige gave a short laugh, half embarrassment, half confusion. You're seriously going to act like this is normal? No answer. Rosemary walked past her and climbed into Deb's car without a backward glance. That night, Elijah met her in his office just off 6th Street. It was closed to the public on weekends, but the lamps were on and the front door was unlocked when she arrived. They sat side by side in the small conference room, papers spread out like chess pieces. This document, he said, pointing to the header, privately reallocates physical assets under non-liquid exemption categories. As discussed, the house remains pending, but everything else is now separate. He slid the final page toward her. She read every word before she signed it. Twice. Elijah sealed the folder and placed it in a burnished metal drawer. As of today, all personal property is no longer assumed part of the estate unless explicitly stated. He looked at her. You've created a second legacy. She nodded once. One that's earned. The envelope arrived at Alan and Megan's house in a thin, white legal packet. Nothing flashy, just Elijah's signature embossed return label in the top left corner and the unmistakable weight of a document meant to change the shape of things. Paige was the one who opened it. She sat cross-legged on their suede sectional, one AirPod in, eyes darting between her phone and the paper as she read. What is this? She muttered, holding the letter closer. No transfer authority, no representation rights. Frozen property assets? She blinked. Wait, what? Alan looked up from the dining table, where he'd been half-heartedly scrolling Zillow listings. Something wrong? Paige flipped the letter around, her expression sharp. It says we can't do anything. Grandma froze everything, the house, the deed, the title. She filed a restriction through Elijah. Alan walked over, took the letter from her hand and read it again, slower this time. His brow furrowed deeper with each line. Jesus Christ, she actually went through with it. Paige turned back to her phone and started typing furiously. Her nails clacked across the screen like gunfire. Guess Grandma's not as senile as we thought, she posted to her story, overlaying a picture of her manicured hand holding the document like a trophy. The caption sparkled with sarcasm, hashtags, and a passive-aggressive filter that gave the paper a lavender tint. Back at Rosemary's house, the notification arrived seconds later. She opened the screenshot quietly and saved it to her digital archive without comment. Then she printed it on thick paper stock, slipped it into a clear binder sleeve, and labeled it in fine-tipped black ink. Exhibit A, Digital Defamation, July 28, 2025. Deb looked over her shoulder from the recliner, sipping coffee, still in her robe. You sure you want to start filing her tantrums like court evidence? They started online, Rosemary said. Let them finish there. You know this means she's going to double down. I'm counting on it. The front doorbell rang mid-morning, and through the peephole, Rosemary saw Alan's silhouette shifting between apology and panic. She didn't open the door. I just want to talk, Ma, he called out. You blindsided us. From inside, Deb raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. He's upset about the house, not the way she treated you. Exactly. Alan's voice sharpened, muffled, but urgent. You've ruined everything, Paige. Oh, please, Paige shouted from the sidewalk. She never liked me anyway. Rosemary stepped back from the door. She didn't need to hear the rest. She'd heard versions of it for years. Disappointment weaponized, blame traded like currency between people who refused to look inward. By evening, she had a locksmith at the house. The man was local, recommended by Elijah's office, and moved with the quiet precision of someone used to urgent requests. He replaced the front door lock, added a reinforced deadbolt, and upgraded the back door to a keyless entry system tied to Rosemary's phone. Want the old keys back? He asked, holding them out. Rosemary shook her head. Melt them for all I care. By the time the sun set, the house felt like hers again, secure, sealed, sovereign. She stood by the window with a cup of chamomile as Deb watched the news on low volume behind her. They're unraveling, Deb said softly. They expected a pushover, Rosemary replied. They forgot I used to archive war correspondence for a living. Deb chuckled. No one survives pettiness like a woman trained in microfiche. But downstairs, on a different screen, another message was being written. Paige sat in her bedroom, hunched over her laptop with a furrowed brow. A Google Doc open, cursor blinking beside the words, signs of elder cognitive decline and financial confusion. The tone was cautious, calculated. She was trying to write like a concerned relative, not a disinherited granddaughter. Her fingers hesitated. She clicked on the folder of screenshots she'd secretly saved. Rosemary's storage unit location, her posts about the will, even one blurry photo Deb had posted of the two women with a label maker and packing tape. Paige compiled it all, dragging it into a folder marked, Protect Grandma, Legal Concerns. She wasn't going to fight for the house openly anymore. She was going to frame it as elder abuse. The clinic smelled like lemon disinfectant and printer ink. Cool air hissed gently through ceiling vents, and the waiting room chairs were arranged with the same false cheerfulness as a pediatric dentist's office, pale blue walls, abstract art, coffee table books that hadn't been touched in years. Rosemary sat upright in her chair, her handbag balanced neatly on her lap, her spine straight, her ankles crossed. She didn't fidget, didn't sigh. She had brought nothing to distract her, no crossword or novel or knitting needles. She wanted them to see her exactly as she was, fully present, fully aware. Across from her, Deb flipped idly through a 2021 issue of National Geographic, but her eyes kept glancing upward. She didn't say it, but Rosemary knew. This was the moment their silence had been building toward. Not grief, not nostalgia, defense. A nurse finally stepped through the frosted glass door and called her name. Rosemary stood without effort and followed. The evaluation lasted nearly 2 hours. They asked her to remember a short story, to draw a clock, to count backward from 100 by sevens. They tested her attention span, her reasoning skills, her grasp on reality. They asked about current events, old memories, family relationships. One doctor tried to mask his surprise as she corrected his mispronunciation of Maya Angelou and referenced the exact year the Cedar Rapids flood displaced 18,000 residents. Another asked her to identify shapes hidden inside a field of intersecting lines. She did it in under 30 seconds. Not once did her hands shake. Not once did her thoughts tangle or trail. When the session ended, the specialist, Dr. Vance, late 50s, upright and plain-spoken, offered a faint, impressed smile as he closed her file. "I've seen attorneys less organized than you," he said gently. "We'll have the signed report by tomorrow." Back in the car, Deb handed her a bottle of water and leaned across the console. "Well?" "They poked. I didn't flinch." Deb grinned. "Then you, my friend, are officially the most dangerous 76-year-old in Lynn County." Rosemary didn't smile, not quite, but her eyes flashed with quiet satisfaction. By Friday morning, Elijah had the report in hand. It arrived in a sealed envelope, signed and notarized, and bore the language of bureaucratic finality. No indication of diminished cognitive function. Subject is lucid, competent, and demonstrating full capacity for complex decision-making. He scanned the document, made one copy for his file, and then forwarded the original, PDF, time-stamped, to the attorney representing Page's concerns. 3 hours later, the email chain was closed. No further inquiries. The challenge had evaporated. That evening, Deb popped open a bottle of champagne she'd been saving since her last hip surgery. "To being lucid and lethal," she said, raising her glass. Rosemary didn't laugh. She just clinked her glass once, firmly. Across town, Paige was unraveling. Her TikTok followers had dwindled after her latest passive-aggressive upload, just a silent shot of Rosemary's front door with the caption, "Some people will choose bitterness over family." Sad, she tried to go live and vent, but her phone kept freezing and the comments turned quickly against her. "Girl, you tried to what? Pretty sure your grandma's sharper than you?" One user simply commented, "Yikes," and tagged a legal advice account. In desperation, she fired off a Facebook post riddled with typos, claiming she was just trying to protect a vulnerable elder being taken advantage of. She added a selfie of herself looking solemn in her bedroom mirror. The likes were scarce. The empathy was non-existent. Eventually, even Alan grew uneasy. That Sunday, he showed up at Rosemary's doorstep with a half-hearted bouquet of gas station carnations and a speech that reeked of someone caught between guilt and financial fear. "I know things got messy," he began, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "But maybe we can slow down, reevaluate, talk it through like a family." Rosemary didn't let him finish. She didn't touch the flowers. She stepped forward and shut the door gently, without a word, before he could even make eye contact. Inside, Deb didn't ask what he said. Instead, she handed Rosemary the newest printout for the archive. "Exhibit B?" she asked. "No," Rosemary said, sliding the document into a fresh binder sleeve. "This one's for a different folder." Elijah's voice was low, but there was steel in it. "You're going to want to sit down for this." Rosemary didn't. She stood by the bay window, the light pooling around her slippers, one hand resting lightly on the windowsill as she watched a squirrel dart across her front lawn. She didn't need to ask. If Elijah was calling in the middle of the day instead of waiting for their Thursday meeting, it meant a line had been crossed. "I've been doing some quiet recon," he continued, "looking into any financial noise that might have slipped through the cracks while you were still giving Alan access." She waited. "Turns out," he said, "Paige used your name to open a short-term credit account last month, tied directly to your homeowner's line of equity." The light through the window fractured slightly against the etched glass. Rosemary still didn't sit. "For what?" she asked calmly. Elijah exhaled. "Furniture staging mostly. And Megan, well, she booked a luxury spa day under the same card. Same billing address, different transaction times. I've got itemized statements." Rosemary's fingers tapped the window frame. "Just once." "Freeze it," she said. "I already did," Elijah replied, "but you'll need to sign the fraud report. Send it to the house. I'll sign by morning." There was a brief pause, then Elijah added, "I know you're documenting all this. Want me to forward you the digital copies too? Email them directly to the archive folder and make sure the timestamps are visible." "Done." She ended the call without another word. That evening, Rosemary sat at the dining room table and reviewed the printouts. Each transaction glared off the page like a betrayal in boldface. $1,280. Interior design, now ink, $437. The Birchwood Spa, $89.99. Vanity House scent diffusers. Deb stood nearby, arms crossed, scanning the list over Rosemary's shoulder. "They really thought you wouldn't notice," she muttered. "Or didn't care if you did." Rosemary circled the last charge on the page, a cafe in downtown Des Moines. The name rang no bells. "Paige," she said. She used it for brunch. The following morning, Alan showed up again. No carnations this time, just hollow eyes and slumped shoulders. "She didn't mean any harm," he said, standing halfway between the porch and the front steps, like he knew he wasn't welcome, but still hoped proximity might soften things. "It was just to get the place looking nice. Temporary. We didn't think—" Rosemary stepped forward. "It was temporary," she said. He looked at her, confused. "So was your access," she finished. Alan's mouth opened, then closed. Nothing came out. She stepped back inside and shut the door. Later that day, at a sunlit bistro in the East Village, Paige sat across from a high school friend turned influencer, sipping an oat milk latte and pretending everything was still in control. "I just need to get out of Cedar Rapids," she was saying. "It's too small for what I'm trying to build." The server dropped the check discreetly between them. Paige pulled out her wallet, swiped her favorite platinum card, and handed it off with a smile. But a few minutes later the server returned, his face careful. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It looks like that card didn't go through." Paige blinked. "That's not possible. Try it again." "I did. Twice." She reached for another card, handed it over with growing annoyance. Her friend looked down at her napkin, suddenly very interested in its folds. After the server walked away again, Paige pulled out her phone, thumbed over to her banking app, and stared at the screen as her balance refreshed, then flashed red. "Account frozen. Account owner disputed charges." Her breath caught in her throat. She swiped over to text Alan, but hesitated. No, he wouldn't fix this, not this time. She tried Megan next. The message read only, "Did you do something stupid with the card?" "I think Grandma's cut us off." No reply. Back at Rosemary's house, the printer whirred steadily in the background. She added the latest financial statements to a growing folder marked, "Fraudulent Use. Family Access Revoked." Deb walked in from the patio, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "Another chapter in the epic?" she asked. "No," Rosemary said as she sealed the folder with a label. "This one's a footnote. They spent what wasn't theirs. Now they'll live without it." The porch light was already on when Paige pulled into the driveway, the wheels of her leased BMW rolling to a halt with practiced ease. Her gym bag thudded onto the passenger seat as she reached over to grab her keychain. She didn't bother to look up at the house. She was scrolling her phone, answering DMs from a sponsored skincare brand she'd been courting for weeks. She swung the car door shut with her hip and jogged up the path, breath still warm from spin class, earbuds still playing something bass-heavy. She slid her house key into the deadbolt. It didn't turn. She pulled it out and tried again, frowning. No give. She jiggled it harder this time, an impatient, slightly theatrical move, as if the lock would respond to entitlement. But the door didn't budge. She finally looked up. A crisp, white sheet of paper had been taped to the glass beside the handle. "Mail forwarded. Residence reassigned." The font was printed in large, clean Helvetica. No handwriting? No explanation. Just those 5 words. Paige yanked the paper off the door and stared at it, her mouth open. "What the hell?" She tried the handle again, then the back door. Nothing. The garage code had been changed. The sunroom latch was sealed. Every point of access had been locked down like a fortress. She stepped back, her breath shallow now. Moments later, Alan's sedan screeched to a stop at the curb. He slammed the door and hurried up the lawn in a jacket he hadn't buttoned, his face flushed and confused. "I thought you said you were still getting mail here," he asked breathlessly. "I was," Paige snapped, "until apparently this afternoon." Alan walked straight up to the door and pounded on it with the side of his fist. "Open the damn door, Ma!" Inside, behind layers of reinforced steel and tempered glass, Rosemary didn't flinch. She moved through the house with quiet assurance, setting her tea on the end table, the television low in the background. Deb sat cross-legged on the floor beneath the front window, screwing the final plate into a sleek new security keypad mounted near the door. Outside, Alan's voice cracked through the stillness. "We'll sue you! This is illegal! You can't just lock us out!" Rosemary stepped into the foyer and pressed the button on the speaker system. Her voice echoed outside, cool and calm. "Be my guest." There was a pause, one beat of stunned silence, before Paige cursed under her breath and stomped down the steps, muttering about calling a lawyer. Alan lingered a moment longer, defeated, then followed. Deb stood up slowly and brushed off her jeans. "Well," she said, "they didn't take that gracefully. They've never had a closed door they couldn't talk through," Rosemary replied, "until now." Later that night, Megan sat hunched over her laptop in the dim light of their kitchen. Her frustration had simmered all day, bubbling toward one final bitter release. She opened a fresh post on her neighborhood group's Facebook page, one of those passive-aggressive mom circles where accusations were cloaked as concerns. Is it legal for someone clearly under mental strain to rewrite their will and lock out family? Just asking for a friend. Elder rights. Enough family matters. She tagged the local elder care commission. She didn't expect it to go viral. She definitely didn't expect her HR department to call the next morning. The email subject line read, "Professional Conduct Policy Review Required. Online Allegations." Attached was a screenshot of the post, along with her name, her job title, and a calendar link to schedule a mandatory ethics meeting. Back at Rosemary's house, the newly installed doorbell cam blinked to life. Deb reviewed the security footage from her tablet, noting timestamps and vehicle plates with near gleeful diligence. The system was now fully integrated. Camera feed, motion sensors, smart locks, all controlled from Rosemary's phone, which buzzed quietly next to her evening crossword. A new message popped up at the top of the screen. "Haley Heller, I saw what they posted. I'm sorry about them. I just wanted you to know I'm not part of this." Rosemary read the message twice. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she walked to her office and opened the folder marked Legacy, Conditional, Pending Review. She slid a clean page into the typewriter and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She didn't type just yet, but the intention was there. The pen Elijah handed her was heavier than it looked, matte brass weighted at the tip, the kind lawyers used when ceremony mattered. They sat side by side in his private office, blinds half drawn against the morning sun. On the table between them lay the revised will, freshly printed, meticulously annotated. A single name stood alone now in the section labeled Sole Beneficiary, Haley Rose Heller. No secondary designees, no conditional heirs, no fallback language. Elijah waited. Rosemary flipped through each page one final time, her eyes scanning not just for legal accuracy, but for closure. She paused at the last clause, one she'd written herself in her distinct, looping script. Inheritance is not a right granted by blood, but a privilege preserved through character. She signed, steady and precise. Elijah affixed his seal, then leaned back and exhaled. "Well," he said, "it's done." "It was overdue," Rosemary replied, "but now it's clean, uncontested." "Not for long," he said, nodding toward the corner of his desk where a notification had just popped up. Paige filed a family manipulation claim with probate. Rosemary raised a brow. "On what grounds?" "Emotional coercion, claims you've been unduly influenced by outside parties." "She means Deb, and probably Haley too." "Then she's more desperate than I thought." Elijah clicked open the case file. "It's already been denied. The court flagged it as frivolous, no supporting evidence, and more importantly," he tapped the screen, "you were evaluated and cleared." On record, Rosemary didn't smile, but her shoulders eased back into something like peace. That afternoon, she wrapped a linen-bound journal in parchment and twine. Inside were handwritten stories, family lore, letters between her and Walter, Polaroids from summer barbecues, and pressed flowers from her wedding bouquet. She'd started writing it long before Paige was born, back when Alan still brought her tea in bed on Sunday mornings. She placed a sticky note on the cover in her careful script, "For Haley, when the time is right." Deb appeared in the doorway holding a box of mailing labels. "You sure about this?" Rosemary nodded. "It's time." Deb studied her. "You just passed the torch." "I kept it lit long enough." They packaged the journal in a padded envelope, and Deb offered to take it to the post office herself. Gives me an excuse to dodge Megan's Facebook shade storm, she muttered on the way out. Because online, the storm had indeed begun. Paige, cornered and publicly embarrassed, had pivoted into fiction. Her newest posts were clips of old videos taken years ago, Rosemary looking tired after surgery or squinting at the camera, clips stripped of context and layered with voiceovers. "She doesn't even know what day it is anymore?" Paige whispered dramatically in one reel. "It's heartbreaking." But viewers weren't buying it. One comment read, "Nice acting." Except Grandma just co-authored a town hall op-ed last week. Another, "Someone doesn't like being cut off." Eventually, her account was flagged for spreading health misinformation. 2 of her videos were removed. A third earned a 48-hour suspension. Meanwhile, Rosemary had her own audience now. The Cedar Rapids Gazette published a Sunday feature on her titled "Power, Age, and Autonomy: The Woman Who Wrote Her Own Ending." The article quoted her on estate literacy, legacy planning, and digital self-defense. A photo accompanied the piece. Rosemary on her porch, backlit by soft light, the plaque behind her barely visible in the corner. "What they called trash was my treasure." She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a custodian of her own life. That night, Haley received the package. She opened it slowly on her apartment floor in Iowa City, sitting cross-legged in sweatpants, her eyes widening at the careful penmanship, the dried lavender tucked between pages, the stories she had never heard but always felt missing. She ran her fingers across one line in particular. "Love isn't owed, it's demonstrated. That's why this is yours." She closed the journal gently, tears brimming but unshed. The storage unit opened with a soft, mechanical sigh as the roll-up door lifted, letting a shaft of warm light stretch across the concrete floor. The air inside was cooler than expected, dry and still, preserved like a sealed envelope. Everything was exactly as Rosemary had left it. Shelves labeled with sharp black lettering, bins stacked too deep, the soft hum of climate control barely audible beneath the summer buzz outside. Haley stood just inside the threshold, hesitant. Her eyes took in the neatly ordered space, boxes marked heirlooms, Walter, letters, Margaret, photos, 1950s to 60s, correspondence, Haley's mother. Each label was printed with care. The handwriting was unmistakably Rosemary's, measured, clean, methodical. "This is more than I imagined," Haley said quietly. Rosemary stepped past her, unlocking a small cabinet near the back and removing a faded binder. She opened it to reveal a contents map, each shelf and bin meticulously catalogued, with color codes and accession numbers. "I started this system when I was still working at the library," she said, brushing a speck of lint from the page. "Didn't stop just because they called it retirement." Haley walked slowly toward a nearby box labeled Photos, 1970s, lifting the lid with both hands. Inside, dozens of prints lay in acid-free sleeves. She reached for one and paused when she saw the image. Her mother as a child, no older than 5, standing barefoot in a backyard kiddie pool with a popsicle melting down her chin. Haley's breath hitched. She smiled, then blinked quickly and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "She always said she never had any photos of her childhood," she whispered. "She didn't have them," Rosemary said gently. "But I did." They spent the next hour carefully opening each bin, separating items into stacks. Donate, preserve, pass down. Haley labeled things as they went, her handwriting smaller, more rounded, but equally precise. She seemed to absorb Rosemary's rhythm without needing instruction. They worked without chatter, the silence between them peaceful, filled with purpose. At one point, Haley held up a small ceramic ashtray shaped like a sunflower. "My mom used to tell me this was the first thing she ever made in art class," she said, turning it gently in her palm. "She gave it to me after her 5th grade recital," Rosemary replied. "Even then, she thought she'd disappointed me." "Did she?" "No," Rosemary said softly, "but I didn't know how to tell her that then." The silence returned, but it carried warmth this time. After a while, they both stepped outside to stretch. The sun had lowered behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lot. Haley leaned against the car, squinting into the light. Rosemary fanned herself with the folder. From across the street, an engine idled. A white Audi sat parked at the edge of the adjacent lot. Tinted windows rolled just low enough to reveal the curve of Paige's oversized sunglasses. Her face was unreadable from this distance, but her posture said everything. Shoulders locked, chin high, phone gripped tightly in her hand. Haley noticed her first. "Is that—" "Don't look," Rosemary said calmly, without turning. "She's already seen more than she deserves." But Haley didn't look away. She held her grandmother's gaze for a beat, then slowly turned back toward the unit. They began boxing up a stack of journals and letters, some to keep, some marked for the local library's historical archive. A new label was added, Legacy, Public Collection. Across the lot, the Audi didn't move. Then slowly, the window rolled down another inch. Inside, Paige lifted her phone. She snapped a photo, zoomed, snapped another. She opened her notes app, typing furiously. The headline she drafted read, "Disinherited but not silent. A family torn apart by greed." She hit save, then call. The journalist arrived exactly on time. She was young, maybe late 20s, hair pulled back into a clean bun, a notepad in one hand and a recorder in the other. Rosemary had seen the name before, Mila Cortez, byline tucked beneath local stories that actually meant something. She wrote about housing access, water rights, aging infrastructure, not gossip. That's why Rosemary agreed to the interview. They sat on the porch, a pitcher of iced tea between them, the heat already rising off the driveway in a shimmer. Rosemary wore a soft blue button-up, her hair pinned back, her posture straight but relaxed. She looked like someone who had nothing to prove, but plenty to say. Mila began gently, easing past the headline bait. "I'm not here for family drama," she said. "I'm here because your story's being misrepresented, and I'd rather hear it from you." Rosemary nodded once. "That's smart. Paige doesn't let the truth interfere with her version of events." "What happened?" So she told her. Not all at once and not with fire in her voice, but with the crisp, archival accuracy she'd honed over a lifetime. She spoke of the credit card theft, the unauthorized staging, the locked attic, the Facebook posts designed to look like concern but shaped like a blade. She showed Mila copies of the documentation, dated, labeled, filed in digital and hard copy. She quoted clauses in her own estate documents like scripture. "She tried to paint me as unstable," Rosemary said calmly, "because I wouldn't give her the outcome she wanted." Mila nodded, scribbling notes as Rosemary continued. "And you didn't retaliate?" she asked. "I clarified," Rosemary said. "There's a difference." 2 hours later, the reporter left with a full notebook, a flash drive of files, and permission to quote freely. The article ran Thursday morning. "Elder prepares her own legacy, and hers alone." It was printed in the Cedar Rapids Register's Metro section and posted online by noon. The opening photo showed Rosemary seated on her porch, hands folded, a copy of her will beside her, not looking at the camera, but through it. The piece pulled no punches. It detailed the financial overreach, the social media smears, the failed attempt to paint her as incompetent. It even referenced court filings and included direct quotes from Elijah, backing every fact with methodical precision. It ended with a line Mila had written from their porch conversation. "Dignity is not something you inherit, it's something you protect." By afternoon, the article had spread beyond Cedar Rapids. Regional news outlets reposted it. Elder rights groups shared it on Facebook. A local NPR affiliate mentioned it in their Voices from Iowa segment. And Rosemary? She received 14 letters in 2 days. Not emails, letters. Handwritten, typed, even one dictated by someone's granddaughter who included a crayon drawing on the back of the envelope. They came from Oklahoma, Minnesota, Missouri, from women in their 60s, 70s, even a few in their 80s. "I thought I was the only one. Thank you for showing me that power doesn't fade, it transfers. They told me to sit down and be grateful. I stood up after reading about you." Rosemary read each one, then stacked them in a clean folder marked Correspondence, Legacy Support. Deb appeared behind her, holding a fresh cup of tea and grinning like someone who'd just watched a horse win a race she bet the farm on. "Guess you just went viral, ma'am," she said. I didn't go anywhere, Rosemary replied. They just finally looked. Across town, Paige sat in front of her laptop, her face frozen in disbelief. She'd tried to comment on the article's post 6 times. Every message was instantly flagged. The 7th was blocked altogether. When she refreshed the screen, a banner appeared. Your account has been restricted due to multiple reports of misinformation and harassment. She slammed her laptop shut and grabbed her phone, only to find her last 3 videos had been pulled for targeted defamation against a private citizen. Her audience had vanished. Her voice had been cut at the source. That night, Rosemary stepped onto her porch and opened a small package wrapped in floral paper. Inside was a leather-bound guest book with a note, "For the women who will follow you. Leave space for all their names." The building wasn't grand, not the marble column kind of monument, but it was clean, dignified, and bright. The Cedar Rapids Public Archive had added a new wing, a modest expansion built from reclaimed brick and glass, tucked just off 10th Street. Rosemary had walked past it for years, never imagining it would carry her name. Now, it did. Etched above the entryway in matte brass, the Rosemary Heller Legacy Room. The ribbon was silk, deep burgundy. Haley stood near it holding oversized ceremonial scissors with both hands, her palms slightly sweaty. A small crowd had gathered, local historians, former librarians, council members, and a few reporters with press badges hanging from lanyards. Deb stood just behind Haley, phone poised to record, the red rec light already blinking. Rosemary stood a few feet back from them, dressed in a gray pantsuit with pearl buttons and a brooch her late husband once brought back from Belgium. Her fingers were clasped in front of her, not to hide nerves, but to keep still the kind of pride that wanted to rise too quickly. The speaker, a woman from the archive board, gave a brief introduction. We are proud to dedicate this space not only to Rosemary's contributions as an archivist, but to her public example of personal legacy and civic empowerment. A light round of applause followed. Deb whispered to Haley, "Okay, kid. Time to cut history." Haley turned toward her grandmother before lowering the scissors. "You did this without them," she said, voice quiet enough for only Rosemary to hear. Rosemary met her eyes. "But not without you." The ribbon snapped cleanly, curling on the sides as if it knew it wasn't meant to resist. The doors opened. Inside, the room gleamed. Glass cases displayed select artifacts, handwritten letters, annotated journal entries, family photos dating back to the 1940s, scanned newspaper clippings, and a mounted plaque titled "Inheritance, a Private Right, a Public Lesson." In the back corner sat a reading table with 2 chairs, a small brass lamp, and a sign-in guest book, the same one that had arrived anonymously just days ago. Guests trickled in, respectful and curious, a few snapped photos. A local high school civics teacher jotted down notes for a class project. Outside, a figure lingered near the edge of the sidewalk. Alan. He was dressed in slacks and a sport coat, too formal for the heat, holding a small white envelope in one hand. His eyes scanned the door like he was trying to calculate the odds of being let in. The security guard at the threshold didn't move. Alan cleared his throat, then nodded toward the door as if signaling intent. The guard's reply was polite but firm. "This event is for invited guests only, sir." Alan's mouth tightened. He didn't argue, just turned slowly and walked back toward his car, the envelope still clutched in his hand. Inside it, a card, unsigned, sat sealed and unread. Across the street, tucked behind a parked delivery van, Paige watched. She wore oversized sunglasses again, hair pulled into a tight knot. Her arms were crossed. No phone this time, just her eyes, fixed on the glass entry doors like she could will them open by sheer force of resentment. But they never did. She watched as Haley and Rosemary stood side by side inside the new room, waving to someone, smiling in a way that made it clear they had nothing left to explain. Paige didn't move. Not forward, not away. Just stood there, still. A breeze lifted the edge of her jacket. Across the room, Deb lowered her phone and gave a subtle nod toward the window. "She's watching," she murmured. "I know," Rosemary said without turning. "She'll keep watching. That's all that's left." Later that night, back at the house, Rosemary set a small frame on the mantel. Inside it, a printout of the article headline. Beneath it, she'd taped a handwritten caption, "Legacy is what remains when the noise fades." The sun angled low through Elijah's office blinds, streaking the polished oak desk with slanted lines of amber light. Outside, cicadas buzzed faintly through the heat. Inside, silence ruled. Elijah flipped to the last page of the revised trust, then turned the folder toward Rosemary. His expression was calm but reverent, like a man watching someone carve a boundary into stone. "This is the final clause," he said. "Once signed and notarized, it supersedes all legacy revisions. No appeals, no partial inheritances, no secondary claims." Rosemary reached for the pen without hesitation. The clause read, "To those who discarded what mattered, nothing shall remain." She signed in smooth, deliberate script. No flourish, just clarity. Elijah added his signature beneath hers. Then he reached for the embosser, leaned forward, and pressed the seal into the page with a slow, satisfying click. The gold crest shimmered faintly in the light. Across from them, Haley picked up the witness pen. Her name, rounder, younger, landed below theirs like a closing chord. She glanced at her grandmother, eyes wide but certain. "Is it really over now?" she asked. Rosemary nodded once. "Now it's legal. Before it was only emotional." Elijah closed the folder and slipped it into a locked drawer. "That clause is a fortress," he said. "They can knock, but the door won't open." The folder's drawer shut with a soft thud. Later that evening, Rosemary sat on the back porch with Deb, a glass of lemonade in hand and her feet resting on a footstool she hadn't used in years. The breeze rolled gently across the yard. A cardinal chirped once, then fell quiet. Deb scrolled her phone lazily, then held up the screen. "Paige just messaged you." The text was short, unpunctuated. "We can still fix this. Just talk to me." Rosemary didn't even blink. "Block it." Deb did. A minute later, her phone buzzed again. "Alan." This time, a voice message. 62 seconds long. Deb raised an eyebrow. "You want to hear it?" "No." "You sure?" "I don't need to hear a man explain how sorry he is that the consequences arrived." Deb chuckled, and with a flick of her thumb, deleted it. A gentle quiet settled between them, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. They watched the light fade across the lawn. "You did it," Deb said finally. "It's over. All that's left is peace." Rosemary took a slow sip from her glass. "No," she said. "All that's left is choice." She stood and walked inside, leaving Deb to the twilight. In the study, Rosemary opened the fireproof safe for the last time that week. She removed a bound letter, a single-page document folded in thirds, sealed in a cream envelope, the return address blank. She placed it beside the guest book on the mantel, right beneath the headline framed in glass. Then she sat down at her desk and pulled a fresh sheet of paper into the typewriter. She typed one sentence, letter by letter, pausing after each word. "Rejection is not cruelty, it is clarity." She pulled the page from the typewriter, read it once, then slipped it into an envelope marked, "For the one who waits but never learns." She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. Outside, the porch light clicked on. Back on the street, in the front seat of her idling car, Paige watched from behind the wheel, the glow of the house spilling softly through the hedges. In her lap, her phone buzzed again. This time, no one responded. The hallway that stretched between the dining room and the study had always been quiet, more functional than warm, a narrow passage of bare wall and worn baseboard. For decades, it had gone mostly unnoticed. But not anymore. Now it held something worth pausing for. Haley stood on a small step stool, a level in one hand, a hammer in the other. Beside her, a short stack of matted photo frames rested on the floor, each one hand-picked, each print chosen with intention. At the center, a black-and-white photo of her and Rosemary on the steps of the archive, arms linked, both smiling, not performative, not posed, just real. To its left, a snapshot from their first day at the storage unit, dusty and radiant. To the right, a Polaroid from a backyard lunch in early spring, rosemary sprigs tucked into linen napkins, Deb mid-laugh in the background. Each frame faced the hallway deliberately, visible from nearly every room, impossible to miss. A living record. Rosemary watched from the doorway, her arms crossed lightly, a calm pride tugging at her mouth. You could have hung them in your apartment. I wanted them where people would see them, Haley said, checking the spacing on the final frame. Where they'll have to ask. Rosemary's eyes lingered on the wall for a moment, then drifted to the end of the hallway, where, months ago, a black garbage bag had once been dumped in her lap like refuse. It had landed with the weight of dismissal. But this was the opposite of that. Deb strolled in a few minutes later, holding a slim, gift-wrapped parcel under one arm and a roll of painter's tape in the other. I brought something, she said, handing the parcel to Rosemary. For the last space on the wall. Rosemary peeled back the paper slowly, revealing a vintage brass photo frame with beveled edges and glass so clean it caught the light like water. No trash allowed in this one, Deb said, smirking. Haley glanced over. It's beautiful. It's from the estate sale down on Hawthorne, Deb added. I bargained the guy down $3 because the stand's crooked. Rosemary turned the frame over in her hands. It's perfect. They chose a photo together. One Haley had found tucked into an envelope marked, Keep for Quiet Days. It was an older picture, taken years ago. Rosemary holding a toddler-aged Haley on her lap, the two of them sitting on a checkered blanket, their noses almost touching in profile, both laughing. It slid into the frame like it had always belonged there. Later that night, after the wall was complete and Deb had gone home with her empty tape roll and a leftover container of lemon bars, Rosemary sat in her study with her legal folder open in front of her. She reached for the document labeled Advance Medical Directive and crossed out a name in clean black ink, Allen. Beside it, she wrote another name, Haley Rose Heller. She signed the change, added the date, and sealed it in a clear folder marked Health Proxy, Finalized. Then, from the cabinet near the window, she pulled the black garbage bag. It was the same one Paige had thrown in her lap all those months ago. The plastic was thinner now from folding and unfolding, but the contents were still intact. Photo albums, dog tags, a wedding veil, a few torn envelopes stuffed hastily with old birthday cards. She didn't open it. She simply folded the bag tightly, slid it into a labeled archival box, and added it to the bottom shelf of the locked cabinet. Not displayed, not destroyed, just documented. Evidence, not memory. When she turned back to her desk, Haley was standing in the doorway holding 2 mugs of peppermint tea. I thought you might still be up, Haley said. Rosemary took the mug and nodded toward the hallway. The wall looks permanent. That's the idea. She took a sip, then glanced toward the cabinet, her voice light but deliberate. I kept the receipt, Rosemary said. For the photo frames? For everything. Haley tilted her head. Even the pain? Especially the pain. They sat in silence, tea warming their hands. Then, in the quiet between them, the hallway light clicked on. And stayed on. The porch creaked softly beneath the legs of Rosemary's chair, the same slatted rocker her husband had built by hand 40 years ago, back when the railing was white and her hair was still auburn. She sat with one knee folded gently over the other, a mug of chamomile resting on her lap, steam curling upward into the crisp morning light. The early sun gilded the fence posts and made shadows of the wind chimes. She could hear birdsong from the neighbor's feeder and the slow hum of sprinklers kicking on next door. Peace didn't feel like silence. It felt like this. Unbothered, intact, unclaimed by anyone but her. The screen door creaked open behind her. Haley stepped out barefoot, clutching a worn manila folder. Her hair was pulled up in a loose knot, still damp from a shower. She carried the folder the way someone might carry a quilt, close to the chest, reverent. I brought these from the archive room, she said. They updated the exhibit photos yesterday. Thought you'd want copies. She handed Rosemary the folder and sat down beside her on the porch swing. Inside were glossy prints, each mounted with archival notations. A photo of Rosemary cataloging letters at her desk, a wide shot of the exhibit's central case, and a close-up of the brass plaque mounted to the east wall, framed in soft light. It read, "What they called trash was my treasure." Rosemary smiled. Haley leaned back and swung gently, the breeze catching the hem of her flannel pajama pants. Deb joined them a few minutes later, balancing a to-go tray with 3 paper cups and the Cedar Rapids register tucked under her arm. "Hot tea for my favorite old broad and her archivist in training," she said, handing out drinks like they were trophies. She flopped onto the porch bench, unfolded the paper, and began reading aloud. "In an age obsessed with youth, clickbait, and chaos," she intoned, "Rosemary Heller has built something radical, a private legacy armored by truth and untouched by spectacle." Haley raised her eyebrows. "They really wrote that?" "Page 4, Civic Voices," Deb said. "Buried behind pothole grants and high school football, but still, there it is." Rosemary sipped her tea, her expression unreadable, then took the paper and folded it cleanly down the center. She placed it in her lap next to the archive folder. Behind them, through the open window, the faint sound of a paper shredder hummed from the study. Haley turned slightly. "What was that?" Rosemary didn't look. "I finally shredded the garbage bag." Haley's mouth parted, caught somewhere between surprise and relief. Deb gave a small, satisfied nod. "About time." "I archived what mattered," Rosemary said. "Everything else was evidence. I don't need evidence anymore." Inside the study, a small trail of shredded black plastic sat in the bin, curled like dead ribbon. The label on the box had been peeled off. That shelf now held the leather guest book, the family journal, and a single pressed lavender bloom tucked between 2 glass panels. Paige's name hadn't come up once, not in their conversation, not in the exhibit, not even in the final versions of the will, where the legal clause forbade her from contesting anything without penalty. Her name had become what it always was, loud in the moment, absent in legacy. Across town she still posted occasionally, though most people had long stopped listening. Her account sat semi-active, shadow-banned, and ignored, her videos flagged before they could trend. Even Alan had gone quiet. An unsigned card arrived last week. Rosemary tossed it in the bin without opening it. She didn't need to know what it said. She didn't need to remember what they said. "Is this what it feels like?" Haley asked quietly. "To win?" Rosemary shook her head. "To walk away." The breeze moved through the porch railings like a whisper. In the quiet, everything felt permanent. She reached over and rested her hand over Haley's for a moment. Then, without looking, she said, "She tossed a bag in my lap. I took out the real garbage and left her nothing but memory loss."